Hi class, welcome back to my channel. Again, my name is Mariana Celine Angawan, your professor here in Trinity University of Asia. And right now we are going to talk about the second part of infancy in our developmental psychology subject. So in the first part of our infancy, we've discovered that there are reflexes that needs to be present in an infant, and also the importance of the presence of the caregiver. So now we are going to talk about the second half of the topic. So now let's go to the next page. So here in next one is we have to have this idea, or the infant should have the idea of autonomy and mastery. So let's go to the next page for me to further discuss this. Okay, so remember that in infancy, I've also described in this PowerPoint that we are discussing actually the first 2 years of life. So the next one is actually we have first the infancy, which is the trust and versus mistrust by Erik Erikson in psychosocial development. Now we are going to talk about autonomy versus shame and doubt. So now this is the second part, or the second half, or I mean the second. We have the infancy, that's the first year of life, and then now we have the early childhood. So now in here, the sense of autonomy is very important. So if in infancy the sense of trust is very important, in here the sense of autonomy is very important, because in here in early childhood the autonomy and the shame and doubt is being the theme in psychosocial development. So in here, the awareness of his or her own will to stimulate the child to exercise it to create a sense of autonomy. So in here, the restrictive versus permissive environment actually affects whether the child will have a sense of autonomy or not. So in here, whenever a child was given, remember that we're talking now about early childhood, okay? In early childhood, in here, during the second year of life, the child now has the ability to actually start the play. So when we say the play, it's their ability to use toys, to actually communicate and actually have fun using their toys. In here, whenever a parent or a caregiver is very restrictive or permissive of the things that the child is doing, he or she will develop autonomy or doubt, or shame or doubt. So in here, if the caregiver is permissive, so the autonomy will be developed. If they are on the restrictive side, wherein the child is being restricted to do things on their own, they will now have the doubt of themselves whether they can do it or not. So that's why the shame or doubt will be developed. Again, this is part of psychosocial development of Erik Erikson. Again, I have to emphasize that because I don't have a whiteboard right now, but that's in psychosocial development of Erik Erikson. To further understand autonomy, again, autonomy is the ability of the child to actually behave independently from of course, their caregivers. So if they have the ability to actually do things on their own and have the confidence that they can do things of their own, that's autonomy. We also have the term mastery, which was also mentioned in our previous slide. So what is mastery? The mastery is the quest for ever increasing competence. The child thinks that he can, and skills such as running and jumping are new powers to a child. So in mastery is only developed where there is autonomy. So if the child was able to develop autonomy, which is the confidence in themselves that they can actually do it because their parents are actually permissive on the things that they actually do, the mastery will be later developed. So in here, the way to handle a child's tantrums is to actually distract them. So in here, they will actually develop the idea of autonomy and also mastery. So now let's talk about the sensory and motor maturation of a child. So remember, a while ago in our previous discussion, we are discussing infancy, we're actually just discussing the first year of life. But now we're focusing on the second year of life. There's a reason why I actually included the first 2 years of life in infancy presentation is because of the relevance of the theories in psychology. So that's why I've also included in here. But now let's talk and focus on the second year of life especially on the sensory on maturation, motor maturation. Okay, so in maturation, like what I've mentioned in infancy in our previous presentation, their maturation or their growth is actually rapid and very much huge, or very rapid. Yes, very rapid. So in here, their sensory and motor maturation actually progressive rapidly as well. So the quality of information available to the growing infant is very readily available as well. So that's why it has a rapid growth. So although immature, the infant's innate visual capacities are preset to select socially relevant stimuli. So we all know that they're immature, but they also have this attention, which I also discussed in our previous presentation. So they have this attention, and with that attention, they actually able to recognize socially relevant information or stimuli that caught their attention. So very young infants modify their behaviors in response to information gathered by smell and taste. So infants, though again infants and also infants specifically, although they are immature, some of their organs are still developing. I mean, not developing per se, but growing. They were able to recognize smell and also visual, smell and taste, and also visual stimuli. With that in hand, they are actually start to respond on those stimulus. So it is in large through motor acts that infants develop and express perception, emotion, and cognition. And with that, since there is sensation, perception also develops. So that is very much evident rather in Introduction to Psychology, that when there is stimuli, there would be a stimulus in response, and when there is a response, there would be a sensation, and then when there is a sensation, that will be sent to the brain, and that information will now turn out to be perception. So that is also evident now in an infant. So though those are just very minimal, but again, they should be developing as well, or maturing over time as well. So between 3 to 6 months, the coordination of grasping and reaching gradually comes under visual and voluntary control. Obtaining objects initially is clumsy but becomes progressively refined rather. So in here, although the infant, their muscles are not yet developed, they are still learning things on how to grasp things or anything. They're clumsy, but later on in life, they will now develop the sensory and motor in a very good manner. Okay, so now we have the gross motor development. So fine and gross are actually different, but they are part of the motor behavior of a person. So fine, these are things that are very needs attention. Like for example, sewing, that's a fine movement. While gross, these are sports, or these are movements that are very huge and requires a lot of energy, like sports, playing, and many more. So gross development in here, they are now starting to have a balance of flexor and extensor. So flexor and extensor are parts of muscles, and these are muscle movements that can be away and near our body. So these are our bodily movements or motor movements. So, and also they have decline of obligatory primary reflexes. Again, like what I've mentioned in my previous presentation, we have primitive and also survival reflexes. Now, the survival reflexes rather are very important for them to survive and adapt in our environment and to actually live in our environment. But we have the primitive reflexes, so these are reflexes that are not necessary for them to live. However, these are very necessary and important for you to identify, to know if there are behavioral problems or neurological problems in the future. So now in here, in this stage or the second year of life, this should have a decline. So the other reflexes should now decline. Okay, so what are these reflexes are? So like for example, swimming reflexes. That's why some children don't know how to swim because of this. Because of this reflex actually starts to disappear over time. Okay, and then evolution of protective and equilibrium response. So in here, their reflexes, some of their reflexes, protective reflexes, and their balance are now starting to grow and to increase. Now let's talk about cognitive development. So an infant can differentiate among patterns, colors, and consonants. So that's why some infants actually now know how to identify colors, because this is also the stage where the colors, identification of colors, actually start to sing the alphabet, and patterns are now being evident, can be seen by in infants. So they also now start to recognize faces. So they know now who is their mother and who is their father and who is their caregivers. So and also, that's not just that, is they also can now recognize the differences of the faces of other people as well. So they now start to cry if they recognize that it's not their mom who is carrying them. So those are just examples. Infants at 2 months of age can discriminate rhythmic patterns in native versus non-native language. So now they are now starting to remember and recognize the differences in language as well. So they would know now if a person is angry and if a person is happy. So they are now start to seeing those patterns. So infants are active initiators, not passive recipients in learning. So they are the ones, that's why autonomy versus shame and doubt is being developed in this stage, is because they are now starting to learn by themselves. So they are now exploring the world and actually try it on with themselves and try to do them actually for themselves. So that's why if the parent is restrictive, shame or doubt will be developed, or if their parent is permissive, autonomy would be developed. So when confronted with a novel situation, the infant can create new schemas or change existing ones to revise or accommodate the new information that does not conform to existing schemas. So schemas, these are mental images. These are mental images that an infant learn, and then these images or schemas in the future actually help them behave in a certain manner. So in here, the infants now start to develop those schemas, and actually, if there are new schemas ahead of them that are also somehow related to their present schemas, they know actually how to accommodate them and to conform and to actually put them together to have a newer and a bigger schema. All right, so now we have now let's continue on the cognitive aspect of the development of an infant. So the cognitive aspect is in Piaget. Okay, this is Piaget's theory. In here we have the sensory, wherein learning to deal with sensory experiences, fulfilling physical needs, and using his whole self as expression and communication. So each action is a representative of a nonverbal idea, what things are for, and major milestones like object permanence in 9 months. Once object permanence is established, pre-operational stage starts. So in here, what's the important aspect in sensory motor? Again, we're on the cognitive development of Piaget. In here, it states that everything about an infant, everything about his or her cognitive processes actually entails and is all rooted in his or her sensory organs or sensory capacity. So that's why it's called sensory motor, because everything that he or she senses about, that's actually the start of the cognitive process, sensory and also the motor. So now the concept of object permanence actually starts in here, but if it is established, we are now going to the next stage, which is the pre-operational stage. But it does but that's in a different developmental milestone. But for an infant in the first 2 years of life, sensory motor cognitive development is being developed. So in here again, everything that is sensory and also motor is now being recognized by the brain and is part of the cognitive process as well. So I've mentioned this a while ago in our previous slide. So again, object permanence all only develop or starts when it is finally established. It will now go to the pre-operational. But if not yet established, we are still on the sensory motor. So now let's talk about what is object permanence. So object permanence is the ability to understand that objects still exist when if they are no longer visible. So this so from the term itself, object permanence. Object are being now permanent. So whether they can see it or not, that object still exists. So that's actually the main gist of this slide. So object permanence, the child now recognizes that even he or she can see that or cannot see that object is part of this world and is still existing. So object permanence is actually associated with the development of language. So language actually starts if there is object permanence, because a child now recognizes that, hey, this object is actually permanent, it's in this world, and whether I see it or not, it actually still there. So if that child recognizes that object is existing, language now develop. So this language develops only after object permanence, because this the child now started to label things. Oh, this is a car. Oh, that's a toy. So that child knows that there will always be a car and there will always be a toy. And also other aspects, like for example, oh, that's my mom. So my mom exists. My mom always exists. So that he or she will start that calling that person mama or mommy or whatever. So in here, so once you see an object as constant, you give it a label. So like what I mentioned a while ago. So 3 to 6 months, movements are more purposeful now. 1 to 4 months, reflexes are present because the brain is not yet developed. Reflexes are present for survival. The only way caregivers can address the needs of the child is through these reflexes. So crying for hunger, that's their that's their communication. The downside of overfeeding the baby cannot clearly be communicated, but some of the reflexes can be seen there. And then 6 months, primitive reflexes are gone, and the baby must learn how to communicate his or her needs. So in simple terms, in here, language can be verbal or nonverbal, but with the help of reflexes, the nonverbal language can be seen. So, but again, this is only possible if there is object permanence. Talking about reflexes, we have the propping reflex. So propping reflex, from the term itself, propping, so you can just remember that it starts with letter P, and its function is also starts with letter P, which is a protective reflex. Propping, protective. Propping, protective. So propping reflex is actually a protective reflex. So in here, if it goes like this. So if you tilt the baby to one direction and their hands go toward the same direction, the baby is ready to sit independently. So in here, this is actually a test of whether the child starts to be independent and also to recognize things and to actually protect themselves. So this propping reflex. Again, anything about protective reflex, that's propping reflex. So I think I've already mentioned this in our previous presentation, but we have the parachute reflex. So parachute reflex also starts with letter P, and also it's a protective reflex. But the difference between the two reflexes that I've mentioned is that the parachute reflex is that this reflex entails when the child is being lifted up and then held upright, and then was faced downwards to the floor, and then suddenly put down as if the child is falling. The child will now act as if they have a parachute. So that's what parachute reflex is. So a while ago, I've mentioned that language, or the child doesn't know actually how to communicate yet. However, if there is object permanence, the start of language will appear. So in here, the communication of a child actually varies, and well, it's not that it varies, but it has stages as well. So the communication consists of speech and language, and all the complex nonverbal and pragmatic pieces that complicate and enrich our lives and are present from the moment of birth. So the infant actually tries to communicate with us, like what I've mentioned a while ago, through crying and also through other things that the child actually does. So so in here, the communication doesn't start when they are starting to talk by the use of language. It actually started um, even after birth. And most of the mothers out there, unfortunately, doesn't know how to actually know what the child wanted if they actually behave in a certain manner. So again, it doesn't appear after having a language. It actually appears even after birth. So speech, produced by precise coordinated muscle actions in the head, neck, chest, and abdomen, involves non-specific sounds. So as I've mentioned a while ago, that infants actually is still growing by this age. I mean, the child is actually still growing during the infant age, and it all goes rapidly. So the speech actually grows, develop later on, because it requires a lot of effort for the child. So that includes their head movement, their neck, their muscles, their chest, and abdomen. And also here the child actually have a very dynamic breathing as well. So it takes a lot of effort for them as well. Alright, so I've mentioned this a while ago, that language only appears after object permanence. Again, language only appears after object permanence. So language, so this is very important and is part of the development of the infant as well. So the expression of human communication through which knowledge, belief, and behavior can be experienced, explained, and shared. So in here, language actually shows on the experiences and all of the knowledge that the child was able to gather, even before speech began. So it has a specific meaning, and again, like what I've mentioned a while ago, it develops later on after object permanence. So if object permanence is constant, the language will appear. So we also have non-language, or non-verbal rather, non-verbal communication in here, like they smile, their body positions, their tones, the points and gestures. These are part of their non-verbal communication. However, during this time, again, they are starting to communicate already. But however, unfortunately, not all mothers or caregivers are able to detect what the infants are trying to say. So person-to-person interaction is important. Recommend toys that the child can explore, no gadgets or recommended. So these are just advices, but in here, for you to develop and to know what are the infant is trying to say, make use of objects or toys so they can communicate what they are trying to say. So in here, tantrums due to not enough language skills, like for example in preschool, they do tantrums. Actually, tantrums is a communication style that a child or an infant does. So if a child is having a tantrums, it means that he or she is in need of something. So again, this is part of nonverbal communication as well. So for us to have the summary of the first year of life, so again, the first year of life began from birth to first year specifically. In here, there's a rapid growth of everything, like their body, their muscles, and everything. And also in here, the child is very dependent on their mothers, and the separation now also starts to develop. Well, that's all in first year of life. And hopefully at the end of the first year, independence will now follow. Again, the psychosocial development of Erikson focuses on the trust versus mistrust and autonomy versus shame and doubt. And then for Piaget, we have sensory motor, and then that's it. That's for the summary. I'll be showing a lot of tables on the next slides for you to further understand what I'm trying to say. So again, in here at birth, so there are reflexes, and then at the end of the first year of life, there should be minimal to non-reflexes because they are started now to be voluntary. So again, the primitive reflexes should decline over time and should be at least gone, most of it, in the first year of life. So at birth, so the child is dependent on their caregivers. At the end of the first year of life, they should now start to be independent and start walking. So at birth, again, the visual and auditory stimuli convey much information from which he learns. And here at the end of the first year of life, the start of object permanence start to appear. And then at birth, mercy of the environment. So because they are now starting to understand what the environment is all about, though they still think that they are part of their mothers, but they now understand that there is the so-called environment. And then at the end of the first year, they are now starting to be part of that environment by reacting to it, well, the stimulus and the response. Again, so here are the summary of the different theories that I've mentioned a while ago. So again, we have the cognitive of Piaget. So again, that's sensory motor, where everything about senses and motor is dependent on that. So everything, their cognition is dependent on that. So the object permanence also starts in here. Psychosocial, that's basic trust versus mistrust, and also autonomy versus shame and doubt. But we're focusing mainly now on basic trust versus mistrust, so that's important. And then the psychosexual development of Freud, which is the use of oral stage, and Kohlberg, which is moral. That's moral is we have the stage of gratification, which is pre-moral. So everything, they want everything pleasurable, they want everything. They're actually, an infant is expected to be selfish, and that is normal actually. So the end justifies the means, so that's it. And then everything about motor, so that's cephalocaudal, so that's from the brain down to the limbs. Everything, the movements or the motor movements are starting from on top or from the middle of our body down to its limbs. So that's what cephalocaudal means. And then also the first year of life, it starts from involuntary because they're dependent of their caregivers, and then it starts to be voluntary because that's the time when they realize that they can react to the environment and start walking. Language, in here, first word are evident, so sound consistently used to refer to a specific object or person. So again, language can only develop after object permanence. So in here, the major theme in the first 2 years of life, first 2 years of life, is attachment and security. So again, attachment because they are dependent of their mothers, and security because they think and they thinking that they should the trust in here are being developed, so that's why. And also their mothers or parents or guardians should provide everything for them, so that's why it's security. So the summary of milestones for the first 2 years of life are as follows. So for the first months, so let's talk about in months 1 to 4 months. In here, the reflexes are used to communicate. So both reflexes, survival or primitive reflexes. 3 to 6 years old, everything, coordination and movements are now starting to have direction and already have a purpose. On 6 months, primitive reflexes should decline or be gone permanently. On the 7th month, they are now started to sit, to actually roll over, and start to communicate a little. 8 to 9 months, they are now starting to recognize who their caregivers are, who are the mom, the dad, or the caregiver per se. 8 to 10 months, in here, they are now starting to communicate by spurting out different words, actually sounds rather, the sounds. The 9th, in here, object permanence, so they are now recognizing that it's their mom that is taking care of them, and then starting now to actually respond to the environment by grabbing, by putting, by grabbing things or whatever. And then 9 to 10 months, in here, they are now starting to actually push some object and how that object actually works. For example, the car they've noticed that there are wheels in the car, and they've noticed that they can actually move the car back and forth. So that's what is being developed on 9 to 10 months. And in 10 months, they are now starting to sit up alone and actually start to crawl away from their caregivers or from their mom or dad. And under 1 year, they are now starting to walk. And here, away from their parents, realizing that they are now an independent being. And yes, that's where the things on, or how they do things on their own. So development, it is actually, especially in the first 2 years of life, infancy per se, is that it's about themselves, okay, and everything about themselves is very important. And the environment is actually something that is scary and needs that's why they need trust, and if ever, there also needs confirmation that they are doing good. So everything about their development is more on rapid. It's more on about them steering away from their parents and starting to notice that they're actually independent beings. So here are the summary of the first year of life. So that's it. But I'll just gonna flash this, but I will not go to it one by one because I've mentioned a lot already in the previous slides. But this is for your eyes as well for more information. And then we have here the summary for the second year of life. So the summary, again, sensory motor for the cognitive, in psychosocial. Again, we have in the first year of life, we have trust versus mistrust. On the second year, we have the autonomy versus shame and doubt. The psychosexual stage in here, if in infancy, that's oral. Now we have the anal. In moral, by Kohlberg, still on the pre-moral stage of gratification. And then on the motor, that is as follow. So in here, they're starting now to kick the ball because they are now independent and they are now exploring the environment. So the language in here, they are now using words, increasing words. So limited words only, 50 words. Alright, so this is just a summary and for your eyes, for you to further understand what is the development of the first 2 years of life looks like. So thank you very much. Oh my god, that was a huge or a very long presentation, but I hope you've learned a lot from this presentation, infancy and specifically the first 2 years of life. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please let me know at the comment section down below and I'll be happy answering it. So thank you very much. I'll see you then. Bye for now.